Hello everyone, and today I want to talk to you about Firebase authentication again, but specifically Google authentication through Firebase. So we'll be signing in with Google, and a little bit about the cloud storage, Firebase storage. We'll kind of deal with storing the user's Google's profile pic. So when they sign in with Google, we'll actually grab that profile pic and store it up on Firebase storage. Okay, so just a quick overview again. It's kind of what we looked at in the general authentication section. So, but just to recap, most apps need to know the identity of a user. Knowing a user's identity allows an app to securely save user data in the cloud and provide the same personalized experience across all of the user's devices. Now, what we looked at already, which was Firebase Authentication, provides backend services, easy to use SDKs and ready-made UI libraries to authenticate users to your app. It supports authentication using passwords, phone numbers, and popular federated identity providers like what we're going to use, which is Google. So you can let your users authenticate with Firebase using their Google accounts by integrating Google sign-in into your app. So that's what we're going to do in the lab as well. Okay. So specifically, with the Google Identity Platform for Android, you can allow application users to sign in with their existing Google accounts. It helps you in knowing your end users and providing them with a better enriched experience in your application. As soon as you allow the user to use Google sign-in, you can easily get info about that user, such as email, display name, and the profile pic. That's what we're going to grab as well. You can also get, for example, access to the user's Google Drive account, allowing them add an event to their calendar, share with their Google contacts, or whatever. So any of those apps that you're familiar with already, where you were asked to sign in with Google, you get access to all this extra information, which is really, really nice. And it's all done relatively seamlessly. All you need to know is what properties you want to get at, what scopes you want to request, and we look at those in some of the code snippets. And once that's all set up, and I'll be using the same link again with that GitHub repo, Google give you most of the kind of setup code to begin with. So there's really not too much extra we need to do. Anyway, overall, it's a quick and easy way to engage end users in your application. Okay, so there's that link again. This is on the developer docs themselves. There's a link to it up online, integrating Google sign-in into your Android app. There's a couple of different ways to do it. There's kind of different ways, different kind of navigation paths on the docs themselves. I've picked a particular one, which I think is the most straightforward one. So what we're going to cover, as I say, is Google authentication through Firebase. You could actually do this separately and just kind of authenticate against the Google servers through your own web app, through a mobile app that just has no Firebase backend. But because we're using Firebase, I thought it made sense just to continue on with that, and we'll authenticate with Google sign-in, but through Firebase. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is, and hopefully you've done this already in previous labs, is create your Firebase project. So the assumption here is that we already have our Firebase project available to us. In previous labs, we would have set up and authenticated against a basic email and password. So now we're actually going to set it up for Google sign-in. So the next few slides are just kind of screenshots, just taking you through what to expect in that particular setup. Okay, so if you see here for ourselves, we will go back to your console, back to your authentication tab. You'll access your Google link. Okay, that will ask you then to enter some information. I just changed this myself. If we actually have a look on the next slide. So I changed it so we would just enable it, give it a name, give it a particular email, and this is tied to the fact that if there's any, as I said, support information that might be necessary, or you want to attach that email to some other stuff you're sending out, that's what that's required for. Just save on that. Excuse me. And then you end up with this. So we're back to now our Google authentication is enabled, as well as our existing email password. Okay. So again, you probably have that done in about 5 minutes. Pretty quick, pretty straightforward. Okay. The next thing to do is actually set up our sign-in method, and again, a couple of different ways to do this, but we need a specific key, like you would have done with the maps with Eamon, and we will do again. Okay, in a kind of similar section in this, we need to get our SHA1 fingerprint from our application and associate that then with the project on our Firebase console. So there's a detailed kind of step through in the labs, but this is just a screenshot of the link that I would take you through. So I give you extra screenshots in the lab itself. So getting your SHA1 fingerprint, which you probably may have access to already, and then how to associate that with your project. Okay, when you're finished, you will be presented with this particular screen. Okay, so it's telling you to download this particular client information, has your client ID. I've copied out my own client secret because that would be specific to everyone, right? And they're asking you to kind of to download that and use that as part of your project. What I find that it does get a little bit tricky. So what I would recommend doing, I can stand over this, and I know this works, is go back and re-download your Google Services JSON file and just overwrite then and bring that back into your project. Okay, and if you need to, as I said, you could do all this manually. You could just go into the project settings and add it separately here. So if you can see here I've added the fingerprint, I have the package name, right? So you could manually add it that way too, but that step through process will kind of do all this for you, kind of a little bit automatically for you. Okay, so again, I've gone back to this GitHub repo for Firebase, the quick start -Android, loads of information in it. I took the email, a lot of the stuff from the basic email password authentication. I took the database stuff. I'm going to do the same for the Google sign-in and a little bit of the storage as well. Okay. So to look at some of the information that's on the developer docs and take you through those steps. So the final thing is you would configure your Google sign-in and this new object here, this Google sign-in client. So this is how we get access and to the Google information that we want to then use within our app. So just to kind of read through it there for you. So in your sign-in activities on create method, configure Google sign-in to request the user data required by your app. For example, to configure Google sign-in to request the user's ID and basic profile information, create a Google sign-in options object with the default _sign_in parameter. To request users' email addresses as well, create the Google sign-in options object with the request email option. So that's what we're doing down here. So where we want to get the user's email, right, or requesting the email, should I say, as well as the basic user's ID. Now, you can actually request a lot more stuff there. So I think I have it on the next couple of slides. If you wanted to request access to their calendar, access to their Google Drive, there will be other requests that you would attach to this, the options, the Google sign-in options, and we're just calling it GSO here, and we will pass this off somewhere else in a minute. But it's at this point you decide what you want to get access to and what you want to request from the user's Google sign-in kind of profile. Okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah, one final thing there. This is important. This request ID token, we need this to authenticate against our Firebase backend. So this default web client ID, that will be embedded in your Google-JSON file. So that's kind of important there. So just make sure that when we are requesting this, and we can use this to authenticate against any backend server. So if you had a Node server, some other kind of web backend, you would still be using this request ID token to authenticate against that server. For us here, because it's Firebase, it's all done nice and seamlessly for us. A little bit of extra work you would have to do to authenticate against a separate backend, but it's definitely doable. Okay. So just look a little bit more about it. So if you need to request, this is what I was talking about. If you need to request additional scopes to access the Google APIs, specify them with request scopes. So for the best user experience on sign-in, only request the scopes that are required for your app to minimally function. Request any additional scopes only when you need them, so that your users see the consent screen in the context of an action they performed. So there's a link there up online. A simple example of that would be maybe working with the maps, because there's no point in requesting access to your location when your app starts if you only need it when the user goes to the map. So that's the kind of stuff we're talking about there. Then also in your sign-ins activity on create method, create a Google sign-in client object with the options you specified. So again, this is what we're using here. So here we are So we're just assuming this has been declared elsewhere. We will actually be declaring this inside our inside our donation, our app, the application object. Okay. Now, for some reason, the developer docs, a mix between Kotlin and Java. So you can see here, this is actually kind of with the little semicolon at the end. This is Java code that we'll be using, but you get the idea. We're just calling on the Google sign-in client, which is kind of the part of the SDK, get client on the activity itself, right? So this will be, we'll be seeing this kind of stuff inside our home activity, right? And then we pass in those options. So again, those options specify what we're requesting. For us, it was a basic email, but again, there's a lot of other stuff you could request there if you needed to. Okay, all assigned, all instantiated with our Google sign-in client, and that's what we use then later on for authentication purposes, for getting at the actual Google information that we want. Okay, so some of this we've done already. So here we are creating our authentication, our Firebase auth instance. And here we are initializing it. So again, we would have seen this already. We have done stuff like this before. So let me sort out there our thing again. So there we go. Okay. We then initialize when initializing our activity, check to see if the user is currently signed in. So again, we would have already done this inside we have our on start inside our login activity. So we're just checking to see if we do have a current user. And that will either return null or non-null if the user signed in, and then we would have passed it off to our update UI method, which will in turn check to see again if it's a null, take the user somewhere else, maybe ask them to sign in, or and authenticate, or if they are already signed in, take them straight to the home screen. So again, some of this, a lot of this actually we kind of have already. Okay. So after that, once we've kind of done the initial setup for authentication, we can then add the Google sign-in button to our app. Again, all part of the SDKs. All you really need to do is bring in the sign-in button into the layer. So you can actually drop this in like so, right? We're just calling it sign-in button, and again, I'm going to keep it the same. No point in reinventing the wheel. Okay, and if you want to, right, what you can do is you can change, and this is what we do as well. You can change the look and feel of the button. Again, this is kind of Java code, so we could actually just get directly at our sign-in button because of our Android extensions, and we will change it slightly from the default look, which is this one up here, which is kind of the white button, and we will change this in our code to something like this. So we have kind of to kind of stay in tune with the application itself, the color scheme that we're using, so it looks more part of the app, I suppose, really. So what we do is, for us here, as I said, that would be the Java version. So again, nice little comparison here again, why Kotlin is kind of nicer to use. Here we are directly accessing our sign-in button, setting its click listener on the activity itself, which is our login activity. So if the user clicks on our sign-in button, we will take them off and take them through a different flow, as opposed to just the basic sign-in and authentication against email and password. Okay, and we look at that code specifically in the next section in the code walkthrough. Okay, continuing on with our kind of sign-in flow, right? So in the activities on click method, handle sign-in button taps by creating a sign-in intent with the get sign-in intent method, and starting the intent with the start activity for results. So again, now this is, as you can see yourself, obviously this is Java code. We will have something similar to this in our when the user clicks on the sign-in button, and we're handling that, but we will still kick off. We're just adding to the existing code that we have already in our application. So we're going to modify our sign-in method that's there at the moment. Okay, so just following that again, taking it from the docs themselves. Here we have sorry, just go down to the next one there. Yeah, there we go. So here's our once the user has clicked on it, we've created the intent. So after the user signs in, you can get a Google sign-in account object for the user in the activities on activity result method. So if you can see here, this is the import. We already have this in existence, most of this already, where we create the task, we check to see are they signed in, we get the sign in account information from the intent. So that data, that gives us back the kind of the raw data from the server. We get the account information. So in this case, the Google sign-in was successful, and then we authenticate against Firebase. So we use this Firebase auth with Google, passing in that account information. So it's kind of like a two-step process here, because we're using our Firebase backend, that we initially authenticate against the Google servers to make sure that the users has signed in correctly with their correct username, correct password, all the rest of it. And you'll see that kind of process in the lab when you initially set this up. If you don't have, and you probably don't have, multiple accounts on Gmail accounts on the emulator on the device, it will take you through that process to set that up, then sign you in. And then what we do in our own app is then authenticate with Firebase using, as I've done already and we continue to do here, the code, a lot of the code that is supplied by Google to get you started. Okay, so that's we'll be basically taking this whole function as is, whole method, and just updating our own on activity result. Okay, and so inside the Firebase authenticate with Google method itself, the function, there's the account, our Google sign-in account object getting passed in. So inside it, here we are just checking the credentials, checking the auth provider, right? So that's validating against the Firebase Google sign-in that we enabled back on the console. Okay, and we have there's a callback there based on it. So if it's successful, if it works correctly, right? So inside if the task is successful, just have some logs there. I've actually left them in so you can keep track of those in the app itself. We get the current user, which will now be our Google user, and we pass that off then to our update UI. So we can then just take them into the straight into the home screen. Okay. Otherwise, just the built-in there. Look, if something goes wrong, just tell the user, sorry, couldn't authenticate. The little snack bar pops up, authentication failed. And then we update accordingly the UI with the null, which keeps the user on the login page, and then can obviously allow them to log in again if they need to. Okay. Some extra bits worth knowing about, right? It says you can also get the user's email address with get email, which we're doing. The user's Google ID, right, for the client side with a specific get ID, and as we're using as well, an ID token for the user with get ID tokens. That's kind of a unique ID that you could use. Kind of like we were, if you can remember back to our Mongo ID, kind of that unique ID, so it uniquely identifies the individual user. If you need to pass the currently signed in user to a backend server, send that ID token to your backend server and validate that token on the server itself. So again, this is all looked after us automatically with Firebase, but if you were working with a different backend, that's the token you would need to be passing off. Okay. Extra bits there. Some of the, if you wanted to, right? So you can see here we have our Google sign-in account. So this will be inside an activity. You can see it here. Again, this is Java code for some reason, right? We will see our own stuff, obviously, our Kotlin code when we look at the labs, but we can there's methods there, get the display name, get the given name, get the family name, email and ID we're looking at. This is relevant for us. Just change this again. We have a get photo URL. So there's a photo URL property that we will be accessing via Kotlin, and that will give us a URL of the user's Google profile pic, which we will then store in Firebase, and specifically the storage. Okay, I think that's about it. Yeah, so we look at what we do with the Google authenticated user in the code walkthrough and the lab. So we'll be looking at, I think it might be covering storage next. Can't remember. It's like one or the other. We cover it all eventually. And then in the code walkthrough, we kind of cover both the Google authentication, the Firebase storage, and then in the lab, it will take you through that, setting up with the key, setting the buttons, signing in with Google, and then that whole kind of process where we can change the image. We then associate that image with the user's donation. So again, I will cover all that in the code demo itself. So if you want to just jump to the end of this video, the full video, you'll actually see a little quick walkthrough of your app in operation. Okay, so other than that, thanks for that. It's a couple of references there for you as well, and we will talk to you soon. Bye bye.